Avatar Aang, master of all four elements, arbiter of energy bending, and the ultimate incarnation of the goddess of light. Aside from one other action-packed cartoon franchise that a young TUCKALMIGHTY grew up with, Avatar: The Last Airbender was the biggest source of my future love for anime and manga. But considering that the live action was pretty astoundingly meh, and the fact that all my childhood classics refused to ever make a halfway decent sequel worth talking about, I thought this might be my only chance to cover the insane power of our OG Avatar, Aang. Because, setting aside my distaste for so many modern series, Aang and the wider Avatar mythology are among the most downplayed I've ever seen in fiction, with it being shockingly common for people to write Aang off as some street-tier goon without ever really giving his more nuanced toolkit and shockingly impressive feats a second glance. So I'm hoping that this video helps to sort of mitigate that view of the series for you, while also giving something a bit more reasonable to use the next time any of these cross-verse debates come up and you've gotta go to bat for our boy or his gang. Now, while I promise I'll get into the hard numbers and more blatant power scaling stats in a second, to fully appreciate just how OP that the Avatar truly can be, I want to explain Aang's hacks and abilities first. Because typically, when a character even has like one or two really overpowered abilities, they're treated like a godlike deity amongst the Versus community. But for some reason, despite having more auto-win buttons than 90% of today's heaviest hitters, the Avatar's abilities are just usually ignored in favor of painting him as a dude who can throw big rocks with his mind. Bending just isn't that simple though. It's as much a spiritual art as it is a physical one, because all bending actually stems back to the roots of a relatively common anime power source called chi. And if you've ever seen a single anime, you probably already know how this works. The more chi you have and the better you use it, the more broken that you'll be. It's like something ripped straight out of DBZ, and ignoring for a second that the Avatar has more chi and better control of it than anyone else in the series, people seem to just forget how utterly broken that complete molecular control over any of the four elements is on its own. As we see stated numerous times in the Avatar novels, for example, the actual size or mass of a bender's attacks is basically irrelevant, because the chi that they imbue into their attacks doesn't change. It's simply distributed across a smaller or wider area, in a concept that's commonly referred to as attack potency by the Versus community. It's why Aang, for example, could threaten to unalive Firelord Ozai with just a puddle and some pebbles, or why the first Avatar 1 could seal away the God of Darkness using some wind, water, rocks, and a match, but also why that Ozai himself could create massive fire blasts measuring over 10 kilotons of TNT in output using just one hand, but then needed a much smaller, more condensed attack with even greater power from the novelization's own admission to break through Aang's Earth armor. And while that knowledge might not sound super impressive on paper, because this outside source of chi is imbued into every single element, right down to the particles that comprise them, even your average John Doe in the Avatar verse can basically just smother you with their elements if you don't have some sort of hacks or raw power that exceeds their chi potency. Because if you were to try and, say, slowly chip away at the element pitted against you, the bender could just continuously reshape it back to how it was and keep you pinned there for all eternity. Since the only real thing keeping those molecules in place is the bender's raw chi output. And while it's a little hard to get an exact gauge for every character in the series, even your plain Jane benders like Toph, Iroh, and Combustion Man all have feats similar to Ozai, ranging in those town levels of destruction, with that sort of output being possible to condense into smaller, more localized attacks without losing any of their potency. And considering that even normal humans in the Avatar verse like Sokka or Jet are solidly superhuman in their own right, I don't really see much reason for the kilotons estimate to be much of an outlier. Obviously though, we're not just talking about any old Steve or John here. We're talking about Avatar Aang. Someone who, even by his own merit, was the youngest airbending master in all of history outside of his granddaughter Jinora, developed mastery in waterbending under someone who Iroh considered the greatest of an era, alongside earthbending from the supposed greatest in the world, and could even top it all off with firebending so potent that he could outright match the strongest firebender in the series with only 6 months of training at that. So when we're talking about the real strength of bending, this level of mastery, where powers start popping up way beyond the scope of what's initially pitched on the tin through just water, earth, fire, and air, are undoubtedly the Avatar's most broken advantage. Because, while sure, bending the elements at face value is cool and all, after developing a control of chi so precise that your flames can be condensed into a thunderous lightning, or your water can be used to raise the dead, making big rocks just doesn't seem to compare anymore. And of course, that's all the literal tip of the iceberg when it comes to the Avatar, because after 10,000 years of the reincarnation cycle, all under the helpful guidance of Rava, the Avatar's wisdom and knowledge, through each and every life he's led, has been retained until the modern day, through the Avatar state. A unique and iconic power-up for Aang that effectively turned him into strength incarnate. A single individual capable of bringing balance in both the physical and spiritual worlds. One who is quite literally, by all metrics, an actual god among men, especially in comparison to the rest of his series. The reason this form is so important to Aang's scaling though, aside from just blasting him up to a whole new tier of power, is because that millennia of combat knowledge, battle IQ, and wisdom aren't the only things passed along through the perfected Avatar state, rather also passing on their raw bending abilities. And by combining the greatest techniques from across countless generations in a form with more power and spirituality than any regular human could ever hope to attain, Aang is left with total control of an ability that at least 7 of the 10 named avatars we know contributed something to that Aang just doesn't have on his own. Be that Avatar Sito with his lava bending, capable of causing volcanoes to erupt at anywhere from 300 megatons to a few gigatons of TNT, or Avatar Yang Chen, who had mastered airbending to such an extent that she could weaponize the sound in the air alongside the breath in your lungs, capable of siphoning it all away at a whim if she ever pleased. Even the likes of Avatar Karuk and Avatar Roku, who we know very little about, still provided some insane abilities, such as bending toxic smoke, resisting poisons, control of water to the point of boiling or freezing it instantaneously, and potentially even being able to outright bend the blood in a person's body, if not their entire soul, depending on how good at waterbending these past avatars really were. And of course, we can't forget the avatar that the whole entire world seemingly wants you to know about, Avatar Kyoshi. Whether she's someone's favorite at the writer's room, a weird retcon to appeal to modern audiences, or just the universe coming full circle back to the Big Rock agenda, Kyoshi is seemingly one of the strongest avatars ever. And definitely the one that Aang has the most to draw from as well. Between being the only known glassbender, to learning sandbending, dust stepping, self-healing, freezing a dude's organs from the inside out, or just her general control of nature being so precise that she straight up became an immortal? Yeah, like, fully immune to aging, never going to die kind of immortal. Similar to Aang in the Ice, except forever. And the only reason she did ever end up kicking the bucket, aside from the plot, was literally because she offed herself to continue the line. Pretty metal. Kyoshi also has the largest scale feat we ever see occur in the series, where she uses all 4 bending elements in tandem to split a chunk of a continent off from the mainland all the way down to the mantle seemingly, then pushes it off into the ocean to create Kyoshi Island. And while there's a lot of range in the way people will scale this, and most other feats in the Avatar universe too, honestly, the higher ends of this can go from 4 to 20 and even upwards of 3,000 gigatons of TNT. And while it might be a little controversial, especially considering that anyone who's ever watched my videos knows how much I love that C word, consistency. I honestly think it's totally reasonable for all the avatars to scale up to this insane island level feat, because kinda shockingly, pretty much all the avatars we've ever seen on screen have a feat exactly like this, usually just to a lesser extent. Whether it's Yang Chen splitting the clouds at 2 gigatons of TNT, Seto's count from before, and even Aang himself, since despite not seeing him go all out too often, due to Aang intentionally trying not to unalive people during one of the only events in the series where he really ever lets loose, his fight as Quizilla after fusing with the ocean spirit, we see Aang create a megaton to potentially gigaton scale tsunami that solos all of the Fire Nation troops. In fact, for a video all about Aang, we spent a lot of time talking about his past lives and how they've all contributed so much to his overall power level. But in reality, if any single avatar was going to be crowned the GOAT of newly acquired abilities, it's Aang. Because from learning to redirect natural lightning with just his bare hands, to developing 2 different kinds of sixth sense for vibrations and chi, and even going on to pioneer a whole new 5th bending style amongst humans, learned from the original benders, with this newly dubbed energy bending making the boy who saved the world likely the most valuable and versatile reincarnation of all the lives to come before or after him. Because only through energy bending, the practice of bending the spiritual energy within us all, was the true final step in mastering all the elements fully achieved, paving Aang a path toward defeating Fire Lord Ozai without taking his life. An idea so unattainable that no other avatar could even conceive of it as a possibility. And he accomplished this through twisting the bending straight out of Ozai's body, with it being made pretty clear that no matter who Aang's up against, once he's got you in this energy bending grasp, no matter how strong or weak you are, as long as he can win out in the spiritual battle, it's basically an instant W, since after winning, Aang is effectively just given the debug menu to your soul, letting him limit, nerf, adjust, or outright totally restrict someone's powers however he sees fit. With it even being added in the director's commentary that Aang could just off someone with this technique too if he wanted. And I mean, when you consider the fact that the Great Spirit Rava, Aang's main power source, can seemingly split entire universal-sized dimensions in half, as well as the fact that she should be of a higher standing than the moon and ocean spirits, Tui and Law, who are like literally the moon and ocean, I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to say that Aang might be able to take out some serious heavy hitters with a technique like this. But even if Aang was fighting the Pope wrapped in a Dalai Lama Megazord, I can still list, count them, 2, 3, maybe 4 different ways that the Avatar could put down 90% of characters, whether that's by freezing your heart, taking the air from your body, poisoning your organs with fumes and debris, or even straight up bloodbending you. The Avatar state just grants Aang so many options to drop almost anyone he wants to, even if they have conventionally better stats. But with some pretty consistent town level scales for his base state, and island to maybe even country level feats for that Avatar state, coupled with the most blatant lightning dodging feats in fiction, alongside a host of other really weird niche bending abilities that'll almost always give him a home court advantage of sorts, ranging anywhere from plant bending to sweat bending, mud bending, and even perfume bending for when you gotta jump a guy at Sephora, I guess. It just sorta makes sense that the last airbender isn't someone to be trifled with. Comment down below if you'd like to see more Avatar content in the future though, and that's all for today. Thanks, everyone.